Greetings. Thanks for joining me today. It's Fred in Alaska. What I wanted to share with you today comes from a couple hunters. Now, we'll name them Woody and Harold, right? Okay. So they were part of a seven-man group of hunters. This was 5 years ago. This was year before the hunting season before COVID kicked in, right? And they had saved up the money to go with a guide buddy of theirs, and it so happened that Harold had his own plane. He doesn't fly that often, but he has his license and he flies enough to stay current. And he freely admits he's not, the top level bush pilot by any means. It's strictly recreational, and he doesn't get much time for it. So Woody and Harold agreed that they would come in on Harold's plane following their guiding buddy. And so they came in together. They packed fairly light. Their guide buddy had a moose camp already set up, and this is in the interior of Alaska. Asked me not to use the exact location, just due to their guide buddy still operates in the area and so on. So we'll just say it's south of the Brooks Range. Okay, so they get there, and they get there a couple days after their friend had been there and things were set up. And Harold had a hard time. He had to do the approach for the landing several times because you gotta kind of skiff on the water and then get on the ground. And he wasn't well versed at it, and he was really worried about flipping over and stuff like that. So after third, fourth try, he finally came in and committed and made it. Right, no problem. So they get there, and the guide buddy had already been there a couple days, and he was getting ready to ferry a couple clients out. They had other planes come in to pack moose meat out, and he was telling them, hey, we had seen bears. There's gut piles over here and over there. Just be aware when you guys are out. Be aware of those gut piles because there's probably going to be bears on them. Fair enough, right? Woody, experienced hunter, been out in the woods several times. This is not his first picnic when it comes to going remote for hunting. Harold, on the other hand, was a newbie. He had basically road hunted, hunt from the road, see something off in the distance, get off the road and spot and stalk and, shoot a caribou that way or whatever, which, hey, to each his own. So Woody's explaining to Harold, okay, well, I want to check out one of these gut piles. I have a bear tag this year. You okay with potentially hunting a brown bear? And Harold's like, sure, why not? I mean, we're out here, we've committed to this, so we might as well give it a try if it's around. So they decide, on their plan of action. And by the time they had gotten there, they really didn't want to commit to all out hunting that evening. So they decided to do a quick scout, glass around, and then come back to the camp and commit bright and early in the morning and get out there and glass, spot, stalk, do whatever they got to do. They essentially just wanted to find the gut pile. And so for that evening, they did. They spotted the gut pile. There's some camp robbers and other birds around the pile. So okay, it's right over there. We got it, ingrained in the memory. Let's just call it a night. Go enjoy the evening. And by the time they got back to camp, their guide buddy, who had already been there a couple days, and, there was 5 guys when they got back to camp, right? And when they get back to camp, there was 2 planes, getting ready to take off, and it was the last of the moose meat, and before they took off, a couple of the guys parted ways with, right? So now they're down to a total of about 5 people in camp. Next morning, as they were getting up and getting ready to do their thing, they're enjoying coffee and they're talking to their guide buddy. And it was light enough, they were getting ready to take a few more of the guys out. And so they're like, all right, the hunters are going to be in camp, so they'll be around. Their hunt is done, basically. They're just killing time waiting for their ride out. So their guide buddy takes off. They all, off they go. And so Woody and Harold, they get up on top of this little butte and they're looking down, glassing this one particular gut pile. But when they get up there, they're having a hard time finding it because there's no birds around yet. There's no birds picking at it. So they decide they're going to walk downhill a little ways, down off this little butte, and go down and check out the area of the gut pile and see if there's any even bear sign. Like, should we even sit here or should we just go look for moose? It was basically, in essence, what they were doing. Meanwhile, they're making cow calls, moose cow calls, stuff like that periodically, scraping brush with an old antler and, just making moose noises, trying to see, because they're there to moose hunt, but, the bear thing came up. So from what Woody said, they get about 20-ish feet from this gut pile, and it's right near some willows. And as soon as they get closer, the willows kind of erupt with activity, and they can't see, but they see a darkness take off, like low to the ground. Boom, it's gone, and it startled them because it's bright and early in the morning. It's daylight, but it's still shadowy in the brush and stuff. So they were like, "Oh crap!" So they retreated back up the butte. Decided, okay, well, that sounded really big. Let's back off. Let's let it come back, and maybe we can get a better look at this bear, and maybe we can fill that bear tag. So Woody's excited. He's like, oh, man, I'm going to get this bear. And they smell the funny smell and stuff like that, but, again, they're thinking bear, no biggie. They get back up to butte, and Woody had a hard time sleeping the night before because the hunters had, they were enjoying themselves with some cold beers in their successful hunt, the night before they flew out, so they kind of whooped it up a little bit, and Woody didn't get the best sleep. And so Harold said, hey, I slept just fine. I put in my, earbuds and listened to an audio, but I didn't hear none of it. And so I got good rest. I'll keep glassing for this bear to come back. You catch a nap. So Woody's all for it. He said he laid back on his pack and boom, he was out because it was just so quiet, and he says as he was woken up just as the sun was coming up by Harold shaking his boot, and he wakes up to it, and Harold's, giving him the motion like, come here and look, So Woody kind of shimmies forward because he was up the hill a little ways, with his feet just down by, close enough for Harold to reach. He said when he got next to Harold and Harold handed him the binoculars and was pointing, he looks down and he's looking just past the gut pile. And this dark shadowy figure was inside the willows, basically the same spot where they got close and it spooked it and it ran off. And so he's really trying to focus in and he can't seem to focus on it. And it's dark. He said it was beyond the darkness of the shadows around it. It was a silhouette. It looked like a head and shoulders, and Harold kept whispering, is that some guy in a ghillie suit? And they're like, oh, dang, why would one of the hunters still in camp come over here knowing we're out to hunt bear? Like, it didn't make sense for someone from their camp, which was the only one around, for someone to be out there. And they're trying to think, did we hear any other planes? And they're trying to do the little process of elimination. Who or what is this, right? So Woody puts his hand up, waves, right? And nothing, just dead quiet. And he's like, hey, starts yelling down there, what are you doing? You ruined our hunt. So Woody stands up. He's pissed off at this moment, like, who in the hell is this asshole out here? Like, what are you doing squatting down by this gut pile? Like, what are you trying to get shot? Like, he wasn't threatening to shoot him, but when you're playing silly games in the woods, you fuck around and find out. You don't startle somebody out hunting. And so he starts chastising and yelling, and just didn't even grab his gun because he thinks he's dealing with some idiot, and he's just walking down the hill just yelling, and he only went a few feet, just blah, 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 yelling and making all sorts of gestures to the guy. And he turns around, he's coming back up, and Harold stands up real fast, right? And his eyes are huge. So Woody turns around to see what's going on, and this thing had stood up. Now, Woody said when this thing stood up, he was just down by this brush. He was just there. It was just about head height, right? and Woody's 6'2". So he knows the brush is about as tall as him. Now all of a sudden this thing is standing up, and it's almost twice that. Like, he's literally in shock, like, what the hell? And this thing turns and is going from directly in front of them off to their right. So their camp is off to that right too, right? But it's 3/4 of a mile away. But this thing starts walking through the brush, and it's just a little thin line of brush, and you got open area of, muskeg and tundra and stuff, back behind it. And, there's tundra and little brush, between them and this thing. This thing gets to a certain point, and he said it had to have been 45 feet as they're stuck staring like, what the hell? And Harold's holding Woody's arm because he grabbed his arm when it stood up and was startled. And the only thing that snapped Woody out of it is Harold squeezing the hell out of his arm, like, hard. And so he's, breaks the grip, and when they're paying attention to it, this thing drops down to all fours, kind of goes zigzaggy back and forth, and then takes off on all fours, and it looks like it's just going straight away from him, fast. I mean, he said it was moving at a clip. Nothing was slowing it down. It was just gone. And so they watched it for a little bit until it just they stopped noticing it, with the little rises and falls of the tundra. You got these little divots and stuff, and it just was gone. And so they were kind of in shock, sitting there looking at each other, and kind of nervously started laughing with each other. And Harold's like, I almost pissed myself, man. What is that? Woody's like, I don't know. They pack up their stuff, and they make a hasty retreat back to camp, right? Now, a couple hours had gone by since they left. It hadn't been huge expanse of time or anything like that, and they were multiple hours before their guide buddy came back with his plane and, whatever else to get the rest of their stuff. And so when they get back to camp, one of the two guys was up, and he was a white guy, and they were telling him, hey, this craziness, happened over here or whatever. And the guy looks at him and he goes, you know what, my hunting partner, he's a native guy. He lives outside of Bristol Bay. But he's getting moving now. Let me ask him about it. He had mentioned something about a hairy man. And so they were like, what? They never heard of it, right? So this guy, middle-aged guy, he said, native dude, he comes out at the Baskin, is kind of shaking off the little bit of drinking they did the night before, and he's sipping coffee, and he's zipping up his coat and stuff because it's chilly kind of morning. And they all sit down by the fire, and this native gentleman commences to explain to them about the hairy man and things he's seen, and be aware, because they had seen one a couple days before. The first day they got there, this particular native gentleman had spotted it way off in the distance, but immediately knew by its shape and how it was moving it was a hairy man. He had already dealt with stuff before. So he warns them, hey, from my understanding, we're clearing camp today, so you guys need to be safe if you stay here, because it's probably just after the gut piles, and maybe stay away from the gut piles and go hunt across the way over here. We saw some bull activity over there, so maybe you can get your bull moose over there. Leave it alone. It should leave you alone, kind of advice. Keep your wits about you. And then, in a way, gave him an ominous premonition of they'll steal you and eat you, is the last thing he said about it, right? And then he laughs at him, and then commences drinking his coffee and getting ready and packing stuff up, right? Because they had to shut down what they were doing to fly out as soon as their guide buddy got back. So Woody and Harold just kind of look at each other and like, okay. Like, they didn't know what to do with the information, but they know what they just saw, and it wasn't a friggin' bear. It was huge, and it took off. So they had their own plane there. They had their rifles. They felt relatively safe, just uneasy about the unpredictability, the unknowns. They're like, well, what the hell? And they're like, well, we're out here. It took off. It was long ways away when we last seen it, and it didn't seem to be slowing down. So let's go across the way and go look for this bull moose, right? So by the time they make it across the way, which is, a good 1.5 miles away up onto this other butte, and back behind that was some more swampy muskeg area and some black spruce and some other vegetation where, they said this bull moose was hanging around. So once they get up on that butte and they're glassing around, they see the moose. They see the petals of the moose. It's off at a distance. It's down just below the brush, but every once in a while they can see the antlers move, right? So they're like, oh, sweet. So they start doing their cow calls. They start, brushing the brush with an old piece of antler, just making this sound and doing their calls. And this thing's not responding at all, which is weird. They're in the rut. So usually they'd at least stand up and come, doing this little sauntering thing, swinging their head back and forth, trying to figure out where this female is. It's doing none of that. So they figure, okay, well, we know where it's at. Let's regroup down at the bottom of this butte and circle around, keeping the wind in our face, and get a better line of sight on this bull moose, and we could bag the moose and we'd fly out of here today, So they're all for it, The excitement of the moose hunt kind of clouded what they had just seen, but he had it on the back of his mind, because what he said when he was traversing down this butte, there was a couple times he got an eerie feeling, and he would look around, and just chalked it up to jittery. He's jumpy from what they witnessed a couple hours ago. So Harold right behind him, they get down, and they get a line of sight on the bull moose, and they're looking at it, and just it seems off, because they're getting a straight line of sight, and it appears to be looking right back at them. But every once in a while, the way it was moving, its antlers was like it had a tick. It was like the antlers were being pulled to the side, and then they'd straighten up, pull to the side, straighten up. And they couldn't make it. They're like, something wrong with this? Had it been shot by someone else? And so now they're like, oh man, I wonder if someone else wounded this bull moose, didn't know it was wounded, it run off, and now it's sitting here suffering. Harold is like, hey, we can't just leave it there like that. We should go check it out. Put it out of its misery, make a note of it, the area, and report it. If it's already been shot, we don't know the condition of the meat. We don't know if it's been poisoned. We don't know. So let's just go check on it, put it out of its misery. No harm, no foul. Sorry, fighter jets flying over. It's Alaska, close to Russia, nonsense and all that. So anyway, they make their way, and they were a good 300-400 yards from the position of the moose where they were at, and the wind's blowing in their face the whole time, right? And he said once they got approximately 75 yards ish from this bull moose, they're thinking it's going to stand up at any moment or attempt to, because it appears to be looking at them. And every once in a while, still the same thing, the antlers would twitch, right? He said once they reached that 75-yard mark or whatever, they kind of slowed down real quick, and they caught a whiff of something strange. And they were like, what is that smell? They couldn't make it out. He said it was like a heavy body odor, urine smell, which he had never smelled before dealing with moose or anything like that. So he was very intrigued and cautious, especially considering the morning they had, right? And so Harold starts nudging him, saying, hey, do you see that? And Woody's looking right at the moose, so he's like, yeah, it's right there, I see it, and they're Harold's like, no, behind it in the brush, look. And so he's trying to look, and Harold had on the binoculars. Woody had some in his backpack, but he hadn't dug them out or whatever, right? They had just been passing them back and forth. Well, Harold passes him the binoculars, and he looks through, and Woody's not seeing it. Woody's seeing the moose, and he's kind of staring at the tree, not seeing the forest, so to speak, or seeing the forest, not the tree. So Harold goes and points. He goes off what would be the right paddle of the moose's antlers, just behind that, just straight back from that, from our spot. You'll see what I'm talking about. So Woody takes his time, and he lines it up, and he's looking, and then he sees it. He sees something very dark, but had a little more of like a cinnamon red tinge to it. And he thinks, oh, a brown bear is on a dead moose, right? Well, he's like, score, that's my bear. We got lucky. The air's in our face. That explains the funky smell. So he starts, getting excited about a bear. Harold's like, I don't feel good about it. Woody's like, no, we'll be okay. We're already in a good position. Let's move forward just a little bit more to get this thing to move out into the open, right? So they moved forward about another 20 yards, Woody said, and he gave a cow call, a moose cow call. As soon as he did that, he said, this thing stood up from behind the moose, and it wasn't as big as the last one they had seen a few miles away. This one, he said, was between 6-7 foot tall, real skinny, real he said you could tell it had muscle mass, but it was real lean. It was real lean, real shaggy looking, real haggard kind of hair, and it had a lot of gray towards the bottom of it, but the upper part off the shoulders and off the head was this reddish brown kind of grizzled color. He said the lower part of the arms were real dark as far as the hair, because when it stood up, it looked right at them and started doing this number, kind of twitching back and forth. And as they're staring at it, they're stuck again. This time Harold is freaked out, and he raises his rifle and points it in the direction of this thing, right? As soon as that rifle was pointed at this thing, Woody said, because he watched Harold lift his rifle out of the corner of his eye as he was transfixed staring at this thing, he said as soon as Harold lifted that rifle up in that direction, this thing dropped to the ground, and they didn't see it again. He said it just dropped out of the way. They didn't hear a peep, a noise, or anything. No brushes moving, nothing. It dropped down and was gone. And once it dropped down, he was in shock, and he was like, don't shoot. We don't know what that is. And he goes, it's a hairy man, whatever. And he's kind of repeating some of the warnings that the native guy had given him a few hours ago at camp. And Woody's like, let's go over there. It wasn't that big, let's go over there. I think we'll be all right. So Woody, not knowing any better, they get over right up on this moose, and it is half picked apart. He said it looked like pieces of the fur and skin were folded back out of the way of the ribs. A lot of the innards were already spewed out. The liver was missing, the heart, and the intestines were kind of stacked off to the side. You know what I mean? So it looked like whoever was in there, this thing was picking and choosing what it was eating. And as he's looking, he realizes it has no back legs, right? The back legs are gone. And so he's just kind of in awe of what he's looking at. This torn apart moose is just right there, and he's kind of staring at it. And as that's happening, they're hearing noise, and they're trying to figure out where they're hearing it from. And so Harold looks behind them, and this thing had dropped down out of view, and somehow it quietly 108 got directly behind them. He said when he turned around and saw this thing, it had the most curious look on its face. He said seeing it out away from the brush, it had to have been just below 6 foot tall. His guesstimation, right? Because it's all happening a lot faster than I'm telling you. But when he looked at it, he got startled because it was something that shouldn't be. He said the skin appeared to be like almost black. But he said it looked more of like a dirty versus a permanent pigment, right? It looked like it just weathered, dirty face. Said looked more tan in the creases and stuff like that. Said for something that looked young in the eyes, around the eyes, it had a lot of wrinkles on its face still, and it wasn't that big. But he said when they were looking at it, the way it was looking back at him, he could tell it was sizing them up. And so at that point, Harold had lifted his rifle again almost immediately, and this thing didn't take off running, right? So Woody lifts his rifle because they don't know what this thing is going to do. Now, for Woody, it was really hard explaining this part because he said he felt like he was violating something by raising the rifle. He felt like he was in the wrong, and Harold was so freaked out he didn't give a damn, right? And so Woody said when he got a bead on this thing, it showed its teeth and then got up on 2 feet because it was kind of hunched down like it was about to start doing push-ups or something when they first saw it. He said when it stood up and walked off, it did very similar to the one they saw earlier that day in the morning. It walked off about 40 yards, dropped down to all fours, and just gone. Just hauling butt on all fours. He said he had never seen anything look so awkward moving, but yet move so fast. He said the hips kind of gyrated, like rotated around and stuff, and he said it was gone. Once that happened, Woody said, I'm done. Harold was like, I'm done. Screw this. Let's go. They get back to camp. Knowing his guide buddy and whatnot hadn't made it back yet, and they told the native dude what happened, and the native guy just kind of nodded acknowledgement and was like, yeah, you got to be careful. The other hunting buddy was just kind of like, are you serious? Are you guys messing with us? Like, what's the point of this? And they were telling him, look, this is what happened. We're getting the hell out of here. So what they ended up doing is packing up their stuff, and so they got packed up relatively quickly, and they had Harold's plane loaded, and they had it turned around for takeoff, right? They were just waiting for the right wind. Well, because at this point to take off, they got a tailwind, so they can't take off into a tailwind, so they're tucked back waiting for the wind to shift, right? And Harold had already went through the motions, warmed up the motor, so he was ready. He could just fire up and be ready to take off. Well, as that's going on, their guide buddy comes in and lands, right? So, Harold lets Woody out. Woody crawls out from behind the backseat of the Super Cub, crawls up, runs over there, tells his guide buddy what's going on. His guide buddy, he could tell, was just like, what? Tell me about it later. And he goes, look, we're just waiting for the wind to change and we're out of here. The guide buddy lets him know, hey, there's no other planes coming in, so when you guys get your wind, feel free. Well, what they had done is they had taken basically an old pole, and they'd stuck it in the ground and kind of kept it upright with rocks, and it had streamer tape on it, which is a common thing. Trail marker tape. It's lightweight, and it'll pick up the direction of the wind, right? So as soon as that wind change happened, Harold fired up, and they flew out of there. He said once they got up to elevation, Woody was like, let's go see if we could spot them. Let's go see if we could take a look at these things. Harold wasn't having none of it. He goes, I got enough fuel to get home, and just left it at that, right? There's other stuff that happened in the background that's irrelevant to the encounter itself. I want to thank Woody and Harold. Harold I talked to briefly. He really didn't want to talk much about it. Woody, I appreciate you. Keep in mind, like I warned you on the phone, if you respond to comments and answer any questions, just understand that can kind of dox you. You wanted to remain anonymous and whatnot. So that's up to you. I tell that to everybody. So just be aware of that. I want to thank you guys for joining me today, and we'll catch you here in the very near future.